The delegates from Israel and Hamas are set to hold talks along with mediators, Egypt, Qatar, and the U.S. in the Egyptian resort of Sharm el-Sheikh.
Discussions today are taking place on the eve of the second anniversary of Hamas's attack on Israel, which triggered the war in Gaza.
Both warring parties have largely agreed to a 20-point truce and peace deal by President Trump, but they are meeting to discuss unresolved areas, including how to move forward with a key condition on releasing all remaining hostages. The U.S. and Israel remain hopeful a deal can be done in days, but the IDF cautions that it will resume fighting if talks on freeing the hostages fail.
For more insight on a possible end to the war in Gaza, let's speak with Simon Frankel Pratt. He's Senior Lecturer of Political Science at the University of Melbourne. Dr. Pratt, thank you so much for joining us this morning. So the talks, in the Red Sea resort, if you like, are being called the most consequential since the start of the war. Is that your reading of these negotiations as well? And what in particular makes this particular round so high stakes compared to previous rounds?
For the most part, the peace plan under discussion looks a lot like the one the Egyptians proposed back in March. The difference here is that Trump has fully committed to this and is putting a lot of pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu and on the Israeli government to commit to this one, whereas with successive previous plans, the Israeli government has been a little more non-committal, and indeed Netanyahu pulled out of the last sort of staged ceasefire plan about 6 months ago. So I would say that's what makes this one different.
So, Doctor, there's still deep skepticism, especially with strikes continuing and timelines and sequencing of the plan still fuzzy. Just how optimistic are you that this process can deliver real progress? And what signs would you be looking out for to convince you that this is genuine?
Well, I would say that I am currently not particularly optimistic, although it would be very nice to be pleasantly surprised. The reason why I'm not especially optimistic has more to do with Hamas's position than it does with Israel's right now. So Hamas has been very non-committal. While it's made some initial sort of positive indications that it's willing to play ball, so to speak, Hamas has not said that it can release hostages within 72 hours. So it's sort of declined the 3-day window. It has not made any clear indication that it's willing to lay down arms and effectively commit, organizational suicide as a military organization, and it's not committed to being a member of an internationally led governing coalition. It's sort of said that it would join it would defer to a governing coalition that were composed of Palestinian officials in Gaza. So Hamas is really not committed to anything that would look like a ceasefire longer term. It's only said that it's willing to do a kind of all-for-all hostage release in exchange for designated security prisoners. Meanwhile, Israel does have incentives to spoil this as well. Netanyahu has very limited buy-in from his far-right coalition partners, Ben Gvir and Smotrich. And so if he agrees to a ceasefire that doesn't involve Hamas kind of ending its existence, it's possible that those coalition partners will bolt the government, that they'll bring down his coalition. And that would be the end of his political career and possibly the end of his freedom, given that he's facing corruption charges. So both actors have strong incentives to mess this up, and especially Hamas. And I think both actors are simply anxious that they not appear to be the one responsible for the collapse of the plan in Trump's eyes.
Dr. Pratt, would that explain why Hamas, I guess, agreed to this plan, if you like, their 20-point peace plan, and in particular refrained from including its traditional red lines in its official statement of acceptance, if we want to call it that? So why do you think this has happened?
Well, I've read Hamas's statement, and it is a congenial statement that actually does not accept very much at all. And so my guess is that Hamas is does not plan to agree to all points in this plan, and is hoping that initial indications of sort of diplomacy will allow it to negotiate its way out of having to lay down its arms, negotiate its way out of having to sort of end its existence as a governing and military organization. So I think that's why Hamas hasn't been as sort of isn't clearly defining red lines from the start. It's hoping that there's a lot of room for maneuver and negotiation once it kind of shows up, which it has done to negotiations in Sharm el-Sheikh.
I also want to very quickly ask you, Dr. Pratt, about this idea of a hostage release and exchange of prisoners. I mean, why would Hamas, give up basically its biggest card, if you like, and in exchange for nothing really in terms of the other points of the peace plan apart, from a ceasefire?
Well, Hamas has consistently said that it's willing to give up all of its hostages, living and dead, in exchange for an Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, and this is still its position, which has nothing to do with what sort of authority will take Israel's place. And Hamas is not kind of willing to step out of that question entirely unless it's reassured of a number of things, and it's currently not reassured of those. But the willingness to do one great big grand hostage exchange in exchange for sort of Israel leaving the Strip and not resuming hostilities, that's been a consistent offer on the table in previous rounds of negotiation.
And Doctor, the Trump plan also calls for an international stabilization force to police Gaza. Just how long does it usually take to fully assemble, deploy and become operational? And how have similar missions worked out elsewhere?
To my knowledge, there have been no truly analogous missions. There have been international policing forces that have operated in some conflict zones, but never in conflict zones where parties to conflict or former parties to conflict are so well armed and so sort of are so well established in other sorts of ways, organizationally, infrastructurally, and militarily. So if an international policing force takes security control of Gaza, there's a very big question mark in my mind as to whether they're able to sort of engage in the kind of domestic security and counterterrorism duties that would reassure both the Gazan people and also reassure Israel that militant groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad couldn't just sort of regain their former status steadily. I think this is an enormous undertaking, actually.
Okay. All right. So, Doctor, if the talks in Cairo falter, what's President Trump's plan B, if he has one? Does the U.S. escalate militarily, or do you think he'll blame the parties and walk away?
It's very difficult to predict what President Trump does. And so I wouldn't want to forecast with much confidence here. But it looks as though both Israel and Hamas are trying very hard not to look like the ones to blame if or when this falls through. And Trump has said that if Hamas doesn't negotiate in good faith and doesn't sort of sign up to the deal, that the U.S. is willing to sort of permit or allow Israel to unleash significantly greater force. And so we're likely to see a very powerful resumption of Israel's Gaza City operation, the Gaza City offensive, which is on pause at the moment. So that would cause a lot of damage to what remains of Gaza, and it would cause significantly greater misery to an increasingly displaced Palestinian population. Whereas if Israel is the one to make this fall through in Trump's eyes, it's not really clear what he would do. Maybe try to push for some sort of unilateral solution. I don't know. I don't know if Trump knows. I think that there's a lot of sort of ego and credibility being invested in this one last push working. And the timing of it is also auspicious. It looks like Trump is trying to make all of this happen before the Nobel Peace Prize winners are announced.
All right, Dr. Pratt, we will leave it on that note. For now, thank you so much for your time this morning. Simon Frankel Pratt is Senior Lecturer of Political Science at the University of Melbourne.